SF Climate Week, year 3. Here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all of you in the room today, and welcome to those of you who are tuning in from all over the world via our virtual stream. You are here for Plugging into the Future, Decarbonizing California's Energy Grid, hosted by Net Impact in partnership with PG&E. This is Net Impact's first ever SF Climate Week event, and we are thrilled to be here. I'm Hillary Monzo. I serve as the Associate Director of Programs at Net Impact. Do we have any members of the Net Impact community here in the room today? All right, wonderful. Talk to those people during networking. For those who are less familiar, Net Impact is a global chapter community of professionals and students using the tools of business as a force for good in the world. Together, we're building impactful careers and impactful lives. We have nearly 300 chapters in cities and universities that are building and nurturing the responsible business community all over the world. One housekeeping note before we dive into today's event. Please be aware that we are virtually streaming this event, so be mindful of this center aisle of the camera, please. And today's event is grounded in 2 core purposes. First, we want to share the work that PG&E is leading to decarbonize California's energy grid. We're honored to have PG&E Corporation's Vice President of External Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer, Carla Peterman, who will present on PG&E's innovative work on decarbonizing the California energy grid. And secondly, you'll get an intimate window into the career paths of those working in the transportation decarbonization space so that you can bring relevant, necessary insights into your work or your career path. There will be time for questions just after the moderated panel, so please hold your questions until then. So here is where we're headed. First, we're going to hear a presentation by PG&E Corporation's Carla Peterman. That will transition to a fireside chat with Net Impact CEO Karen Johns and Carla Peterman. And then it's going to flow into a moderated panel featuring impact professionals from across the EV and transportation space. Then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. We'll take a few questions from the audience in person. We'll take some questions from the virtual audience. And then we will all gather across the kitchen area to the terrace for networking. Great. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for this afternoon, Karen Y. Johns and Carla Peterman. Karen Y. Johns serves as a CEO for Net Impact, a global nonprofit dedicated to supporting students and professionals through its worldwide chapter network with the mission of building the responsible business and social impact community. Karen is a seasoned professional in the education and nonprofit arena with expertise in business development and philanthropy, and has assisted a wide variety of organizations from the Gates Foundation to the Community Foundation of the Virgin Islands. A graduate of Tufts University, Karen is the founder of the Tufts Black Alumni Association and remains an active alumna. Karen is a native of Jamaica and serves in an advisory capacity with several Caribbean-based organizations. Next, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker this evening, Carla Peterman. Carla J. Peterman is Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer for PG&E Corporation, the parent company of Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Peterman has spent her career focused on California's energy policy and regulatory landscape. At PG&E, she oversees the company's regulatory, legislative, sustainability, and charitable strategies, all focused on delivering for the customers and communities that PG&E serves in Northern and Central California. Prior to joining PG&E in 2021, Peterman served as Senior Vice President of Strategy and Regulatory Affairs at Southern California Edison. Before that, she served a 6-year term as a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission. A steadfast proponent of clean energy, at CPUC, Peterman led the adoption of the first utility energy storage mandate in the country. the approval of nearly $1 billion of utility investments in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, the adoption of utility energy efficiency goals and business plans, and the implementation of California's renewables portfolio standard. Before that, Peterman served on the California Energy Commission, where she was the lead commissioner for renewables, transportation, and natural gas. In 2019, Governor Newsom appointed her to chair the Commission on Catastrophic Wildfire Cost and Recovery. She currently serves as a board member of the Association of Blacks in Energy, the California Academy of Sciences, and the Warriors Foundation. She has served on various boards, including the Federal Reserve of San Francisco Economic Advisory Council, National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, the Utility Reform Network, and the External Advisory Board for Sandia National Laboratories' Energy and Homeland Security portfolio. Peterman holds a BA from Howard University, a PhD in Energy and Resources from the University of California, Berkeley, and MS and MBA degrees from Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. Please join me in welcoming our first guest speaker this evening, Carla Peterman.
Hi, good afternoon. I always think when someone reads my whole bio that my mom paid them to do so. First, some of you might be thinking, she didn't have to dress up for us, right? But yes, I did, because you're all very special, all right? In addition to being dressed up for you, though, I am a little fancier than normal because after I leave this event, I'm going to a fundraiser for the California Academy of Sciences. It's Hillary Sharon, I'm on their board, and tonight's our annual fundraiser. And PG&E has been a long sponsor of the Cal Academy of Sciences, and the specific program that we sponsor is called Academy for All, and it allows students in the Bay Area to visit the Academy for free. And when I think about that mission, and we're talking about San Francisco Climate Week, I really see that connection, because being able to be exposed to science, to interdisciplinary research, really does start to put seeds in one's mind about what is possible. And we know that to address dangerous climate change, we are going to need inventions that have not come yet. And so really excited about the potential for our Bay Area youth to be a part of that. So thanks again for the opportunity to be with you and offer some comments. Love being here in San Francisco, one of the hometowns that we are privileged to serve, and privileged to serve hometowns from the Bay Area all the way to the Central Valley. I also want to just applaud the work that Net Impact does. You know, I wish I had an organization like this when I was in business school. I was a kind of accidental, unexpected business student. I went to graduate school for environmental studies, and in the process, I ended up taking an energy economics class. I was like, oh, this is cool, right? And I started becoming really interested in the role that government and businesses could play in addressing environmental and innovation externalities. And so, but there weren't many people who were thinking at that time about that intersection of business and the environment. And so now I hear about all these programs that you have in your schools and programs like Net Impact, and I am very impressed about how far we have come. And the thing, if I leave you with one theme today, it really speaks to that, which is the importance of interdisciplinarity, the importance of independence, interdependence. We are at the point now where it has to be about solving for the ands. Clean and reliable, clean and safe, clean and affordable, clean and equitable. And so I'll just offer some comments today about how at PG&E we're approaching solving for those ands. So guess what? I have a not so secret to tell you. By the way, it's the first time using my slides, so kudos to those who made them. And if it's like blank, tell me so I can click faster. Okay, back to my secret. I've got a not so secret. You want to know it? Okay. I am a California optimist. Yes. Yes, still, I am a California optimist. Even after the wildfires in Southern California, even after criticism we've received from Washington, D.C., and slower recovery in our downtowns, And even after the San Francisco 49ers 6-11 season, I am an optimist. And furthermore, because I am a California optimist, or I am a California optimist because I am a climate optimist. So I want to share a little bit of that optimism today. So as a leader at PG&E, I have the privilege of serving our planet. It's actually the second part of our mission statement. And we have ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. So by 2030, we're reducing 50% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions relative to 2015. So these are our direct and indirect emissions. 25% of scope 3, so our value chain emissions. And then we have targets to reduce emissions from our customers, helping our customers through transportation electrification, building electrification. We refer to that as scope 4. All that together helps support our goal to be net zero in emissions across our electric and gas system by 2040. So that's 5 years ahead of California's state law. And that's where we're focused. And we're well on our way to supporting these goals. We deliver primarily clean energy, and we enable the highest concentration of rooftop solar and electric vehicles. So in our service area, for example, 1 in 8 electric vehicles is in our service area, and 1 in 5 rooftop solar systems is in our service area as well. So to support our customers, we are doing this with 29,000 coworkers, 14,000 contractors, and we provide electricity and gas to 1 in 20 Americans. So what's exciting about doing this work at PG&E is the scale at which we can do it and the opportunities for impact. Let's just talk about an electrified future and why we want one. Specifically for energy customers. First of all, it's just a better future on all dimensions. I'm gonna put all the dimensions up. not gonna tease it out, right? So decarbonization is just better, full stop. When we look at 2040 and where we can need to get to from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective with the energy system, because it is more electrified, you have customers using less energy, that's lower carbon emissions, and that leads to lower customer energy spend. So this is where we're going. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. But how do we get from here to there? 15 years, there's a lot of progress we've got to do to get there. And right, I'll just throw up a couple. Sure, you've seen them all. You know, headlines like, we won't have enough power. Too hard to build stuff in California. You've been reading Abundance or listening it like me, you're starting to hear that and see why that was true. Or the grid just can't handle all this electrification, and this is all going to be too expensive. But I'm here to tell you we do have real proof points that these are myths and that they are perceived barriers that we can overcome. So let me address a couple with you today. Oh, and there's another one. They just keep coming. All right, so myth number 1, the grid can't handle it. So the first one is that the grid can't handle all the new demand that will come from electrification, especially all the electric vehicles and data centers. But actually, we want that demand. We need those electric vehicles. It is the best thing to happen to the grid in decades. And transportation is our biggest emission source in California, 50%. We're going to need those vehicles for carbon reduction, and we're going to use them for reliability. And new demand is not a new thing. So let me remind you what happened back in the day when there was new demand. We originally made electricity to replace whale oil and manufactured gas streetlights, and for the privileged few lighting in their home, that was clean. Electricity was like a miracle. But we had too much of it during the daytime. It's kind of interesting how things repeat themselves if you've been following that. So what did? We came up with new ideas for electricity. Electric streetcars. Electric streetcars came into existence to use the extra electricity during the day. And this was desirable because the people running the electricity system knew that if we use our existing assets more, not only will people want it, but then the unit cost of energy will go down. And it did. More load came on board where the system had capacity. So we did that. The environment was such that we were really out there trying to sell electricity, getting people to use. So these are some real taglines we used to use. Electricity, a power for good. Do it electrically. Does so much, costs so little. PG&E service. Oh, I want that headline. All right. Well, I'll tell you about it. You're getting it. So let's talk about how it looks today. Where are we? What is our opportunity? How we see history repeating itself? So in California today, we also have times a day where there is excess capacity on the grid. We've built the grid to have enough for our peak needs, enough energy for our peak needs. The highest use times, specifically when the sun goes down and when solar energy is not available. Our grid, the substations, the transformers, the power plants, the transmission has to be built for those peak hours plus a reserve margin. Oops. All right, there we go. Oh no, how do I go back? Oh, here we go. There's a button, technology. Okay. All right. So we call this the duck curve, right? Back in 2015, when there was less solar, there wasn't as much excess energy in the day. But increasingly, as the years go on, we increasingly have more and more energy in the day that we need to use. Now, the reality is we use our grid about 45% of the capacity of our grid. 45%. So that means most hours of the day, most months and hours of the year, we have the opportunity to serve more load and not have to invest in significant infrastructure. But we need load that is going to come on during that belly of the duck, right? So what's a good load who can do that? Oh, EVs, oh my goodness, they're listening or they already knew it. Okay. So let's do this, right? EV load is perfect because it is so dynamic and we can power cars when we have the excess capacity. When we simply time the charging right, we estimate that EVs can be beneficial load and help to reduce overall system costs. We talk about that a lot at PG&E, this idea of beneficial load. Load that when you bring it on, it comes at a time where you're using the system more, and those more electric kilowatt hours to spread some of the fixed cost across. We see a potential for 2 to 3% reduction in customer bills with the next 1 million EVs connecting to the grid. So we already serve nearly 700,000 electric vehicles in our service area now, and we have a goal for 3 million EVs by 2030. Now, and this is possible. Whatever you've heard about EV sales, we are seeing them in our service area. 28% of new vehicles sold in California in our service area are EVs, and in some counties like Santa Clara, 46% of new vehicles sold are EVs. We also launched one of the coolest applications of dynamic charging in Oakland with Zoom in 2024. Because it's not just about charging these vehicles when there's excess power, but it's also using that mobile storage as a way to put power back onto the grid. So we were able to support the city of Oakland with the first bi-directional electric bus fleet. So all the school buses in Oakland are all electric. And so this is how it works. Let me walk you through it. So each school bus has about 80 miles of capacity. A typical bus route is about 30 miles. Drivers do their 30-mile route. They come back, they refill their buses when we have lots of power during the day. Because you think about it, when kids are in school, it's great. The buses are idle during the middle of the day. Then they go back and do their afternoon route. Then they come back and put that energy back on the grid. Then they recharge their buses overnight when energy is cheaper. So this is a win-win, right? Because you have this battery resource for the grid. You also have a cleaner experience for the students and for our communities in Oakland. This is just one example of the approach that we're taking. But this approach doesn't just work for electric vehicles, it also works for data centers. So you hear a lot about data centers and how folks are pursuing them. Again, our view on data centers is we want to support load coming on, but we want to make sure that it's beneficial to our residential customers. So if we estimate if we add 1 gigawatt of data center load to the grid, 1 gigawatt's enough to power to serve the demand of about 750,000 homes at once, just to give you a sense of scale. We could spend $500 million to $1.6 billion serving that new load. Bringing that revenue on can have the potential to reduce customer bills by 1 to 2%. Again, how do we serve the economy and our prosperity, but continue to drive affordability? So right now, we do have data center load and focus in California. It's not just other states. So in PG&E service area, we have 8.7 gigawatts of data center load in our planning and development pipeline. So we're bringing this on. And again, we're targeting that loads of time of day when power is available. So I'll get now into this idea of affordability, right? And about how this is supporting that. So another, I would say, reality for folks right now, but one I will tell you is a myth, is that it's too expensive. And it's really a barrier that we know we have to address. And it's become top of mind for utilities all around the nation. And it's one of the areas I personally have responsibility and work on at PG&E. So part of my organization is the rates organization, which sees firsthand the impact of increasing rates and are focused on strategies to reduce them. And I understand the worry about electric rates. They've gone up a lot in the last few years. And for some of our customers, they are not affordable. California bills used to grow below the rate of inflation, but now we're above. We now have the second highest rates in the country, and our bills are about 11% above the national average. So our usage pattern is different, but we're a little above the national average. Now, there are a lot of drivers to the bill. I could do a whole talk on just this slide, but just want to orient you to this, and you can find this on our website. And it really gives you a sense of, you take $1 of bill and what share of it goes to delivering energy versus what is associated with different public policies, what's associated with taxes and earnings. This just gives you the breakdown. And a key driver for the bill increase in recent years has been safety investments, specifically making the grid more resilient to wildfire. Our wildfire costs in our bill are around 16%. And most of that investment has happened over the last several years. We know that these investments, whether it's for clean energy, for wildfire reduction, we know that they provide benefits to customers, but we also know that they create challenges for customers as well. And so wherever your utilities, you might say this is a California problem. It's not a California problem. As we start to see the impacts of climate change and having to make the grid resilient, we will start to see these costs of grid infrastructure show up around the country. So we know that we have more work to do than our customers can afford. And that's why we have to do things differently, and it's why we're thinking about it differently. And that's why we're pursuing all different types of funding to help fund this work. So for example, one of the things that people tend not to know is that last year, PG&E redeployed 97% of our profits back into the business. So when a business has profit, they distribute to shareholders via dividend. We distributed about 3% of our profits back through a dividend. You can find that online. And that was after not having a dividend for several years. The reason we did that is because we knew that that cash was important to continue to do work. And we knew that our customers support and our investors support having a strong grid. When we talk about who our investors are, they are teachers, they are firefighter pensions, they are firefighters. They are folks who live and work in the state and want to see us having a safe system. But they are not profit maximizing. It's kind of an example of they have been supportive of our strategy here because they know it's the sustainable one. So where are we on bills? I am happy to say that after a while, the good news is that our electric bills are lower than they were last year, and our bills on average are flat to last year, and they're forecasted to go down. And so we are stabilizing bills, and we're also focused on what more can we do to continue to make them further affordable. So I'll tell you how it works, right? You're like, okay, how can you do this? That sounds nice, but what is the thinking behind it? And the thinking behind it is, let me see what this next slide says. Okay, reasons to believe. I don't want to give you that yet. Okay, let's see. Let's start here. So I want to talk about the simple, affordable model. I don't have a great slide on this yet, but I will. So a simple, affordable model, it sounds like marketing jargon, but it's not. It's our approach to how we're going to be able to invest in capital, but not have rates grow faster than inflation. And it is one of the reasons that I believe. So the way this works is we need to invest in capital, new poles, new wires, but we can't have rates grow at the same pace of those infrastructure investments. So the way we keep rates affordable is you grow that capital and you offset some of that cost with reductions in expense. So reductions in your O&M expense. Also more efficient financing, because the higher financing cost, that goes in the bill as well, and then by supporting load growth. So capital investment paired with reduction in expenses and load growth allows for a more affordable trajectory for bills. And so there's a lot of expense we can focus on, especially expense that's tied, that can go away when you make more permanent investments in the grid. So in 2024, we saved 4% in operating and maintenance costs. Our coworkers have been finding just different ways to eliminate waste, to bundle work that otherwise was not bundled, to improve processes. Doing this more efficient work allowed us ultimately to save customers about $1 billion just through doing some of the more of the efficiencies. A really kind of concrete example is that trade-off between vegetation management and hardening the system and undergrounding. So 10% of our bill right now is from trimming trees and removing trees. We have 8 million trees in our service area near lines, and so we are very focused on, and that's expense every single year, year after year. That's why we are supportive of undergrounding in our highest risk miles, because that has a higher level of wildfire risk reduction, and then you can also start to reduce the expense you have in vegetation management. At the same time, we're working on how do we innovate within undergrounding. We've been able to drive down the cost of undergrounding by half through innovations. Everything from digging the trench more shallow, because when you dig a trench, right, you got a bunch of dirt, and you got to put that dirt somewhere. Nobody wants that dirt anywhere. It takes a lot to actually get rid of dirt. And so how do you innovate across just the whole value stream? The other thing that we're doing is we're going to leverage, again, the beneficial load growth from EVs and data centers, because we know that that new demand will make a difference. So those are just a couple of the ways about which we're focused on affordability. And I'll say continue to watch our progress, and so that we can deliver. But it doesn't happen overnight. We do need more creative solutions. And so I welcome you to provide those to us. So those are, I say, if you want to join us and keep finding out what's going on, here's a QR code. Come check it out. See what your local utility is up to. So with that, thanks for the time, and I look forward to our fireside chat. Okay.
Ready for our chat.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of stage craft.
No crowd work.
Don't look at the stage.
You want me to change the backdrop? Or do you want to sit? Oh, you can maybe just put them on the chair.
These are both on.
Well, I think I have like 3 mics
right,
now.
you don't need the mic.
Again, thank you all for coming, and please another round of applause for Carla. The ability to make this topic electrifying, no pun intended.
It charges me up.
There's that, right? We could go all day with this. But again, wanted to make sure that we cover a few things, but also give a chance for a couple of questions before she gets ready for her Cinderella moment and head off to this. I'll start with something you referenced, this optimism. And clearly you've had a long look at this space in terms of the changes that's been happening in the industry. And how, from a sort of high level, has the state's approach to clean energy evolved during your career? And how have things evolved for the consumers?
So when I reflect on what I've seen as the, this work. Seeing on the evolution, as you said, I first started studying California, and then I started being in the policy and seeing that evolution. I would say in the last couple of decades, the state really focused on setting the vision, the target, the ambition, understanding, and trying to getting people excited about where we needed to be in 30 to 40 years. And you saw that through really signature legislation and orders like cap and trade, the renewable portfolio standard, and a lot of work focused on mitigation. we can reduce greenhouse gases. So a real focus on energy efficiency, renewables, storage. The evolution that I've seen is now we are very more laser focused on the ands. So clean, but it also not if it's not affordable, not if it's not reliable. And related to that, focus on execution. Like, how do we actually build out at the scale? Because the building was kind of going like this, but to get where we need to go, we've really got to increase. The other focus is the shift to adaptation as well as mitigation. I mean, we are experiencing extreme climate in our service area. We file a climate vulnerability assessment with our regulator every few years. And in that, we have wildfires, we also have drought, we have subsidence, we have heat. And so really having to think about investments from that perspective. And then to your point about the customer experience, I would say in the kind of first couple of decades on this, most customers were not engaged. Yes, there were some customers who did energy efficiency, but most people just the light bulb started switching and then suddenly you were doing energy efficiency, right? Or you had some customers who were prosumers who were focused on adopting rooftop solar. But for the most part, there were supply side things handled by the utility and policymakers, like big building. As we're going to now, we need to have the customer engaged in the transition. Because as we said, transportation is the biggest source. So people have to change their driving patterns and their car usage. Building electrification is the second area where we have to really make progress. And again, behavior is going to drive that.
You know, one of the things that we talked about before this session and you referenced was your journey towards where you sit now in terms of the career path you followed. And I always confess in these events that I'm the classic liberal arts major, an English major, and I'm always amazed with students who are now in rooms where they're learning about these issues. You know, you referenced your time at Howard and wishing you even knew these rooms existed. But would love to have you share a little bit about the zigzag journey, because I use that term a lot when I talk to students, that rarely do you end up in these positions with a straight line. And so just a little bit sense of your career path and, you know, what was the moment that turned you on to this, and what are some of the key things in your MBA experience and, you know, learning in school and then getting out into the real world that helped prepare you for this moment?
Sure. So I was a liberal arts major as well. I was a history major with a focus on European at a historically black college. So it was I learned a lot. It was a good experience. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, I wanted to be an environmental attorney, and then I ended up taking an energy economics class, and it made me reflect that I could really influence the environment as well if I worked upstream in terms of the development of the energy, in addition to trying to address injustices kind of at the back end. And when I think about formative experiences, maybe I'll go to graduate school, think about my PhD at UC Berkeley. I knew that I was doing economics courses, but I knew I didn't want to be a professor. So I really wanted to do something applied. And so what was really formative for me were internships. And so I interned at the California Public Utilities Commission my first summer in graduate school at UC Berkeley. And I was like, what is this place? Wow, these people influence all these decisions and no one knows who they are, like, you know? And I was like, that's cool. And I had the chance at the time my job was to summarize comments from public proceedings. And so I got a real understanding of all the different stakeholders that come together to weigh in on important utility and energy decisions. And I said, I want to be a part of this system. So that was one, and so that was my first job at the PUC. And then about 10 years later, I got to be a commissioner. And so that was a journey. But the second thing I did that was formative was I just volunteered to give policy talks places. So at the time, it was like the Energy Policy Act was being passed at the national level. I said, hey, can I do a lunch and learn in the economics department? Or I did I do free talks for nonprofits. And it was a way for me to both hone my research skills and also my presentation skills and develop my network. There are people who I went to school with who are now in high-level positions in all different types of organizations. And it's those bonds that you have that really allow you to work through challenging issues.
I will probably just add a little bit to this, or ask you to add. You know, one of the things we try to do at Net Impact is use this line that you can have impact anywhere. And while we see students now coming out of institutions with more specialized focus, one of the things I know I tend to put attention to is making sure there's room for everyone, because depending on where you enter the space, I was a first generation student. I think about our students at some of the minority serving institutions, our students in West Virginia or different parts of the world. Some of these career paths are not available to them, but they still want to have impact. Has that been your sense that there, you can sort of sit anywhere, even in a firm like PG&E, and have impact in a broader sense?
I do. I mean, I have an interdisciplinary degree, and the way we talk about my classmates, I used to talk about it, is a building has bricks. You need bricks, right? And I think the bricks, those are your specialists. But you also need mortar. You need the people who are going to bring it all together. And when I talk to people and they say, well, I don't have this background, et cetera. I said, someone asked me what my special skills were. This is in college or graduate school. I said, I'm good at a party. I like to talk to people, I network, and it's kind of like what my jobs ended up being, right? I do external work, right? You have to be able to talk to anyone and who think differently. You have to find the common ground. And so sometimes it's just asking someone, like, what are you just good at right now? Don't even think about the job. And then what can you parlay that into? What I love about our sector is you can have a background in anything. You can be a graphic artist and help communicate. You can be a biologist, you can be an economist, there's so much that you can do. And in a company like ours, people have long careers because they are able to flex and try different things, and the world is changing. Like what I'm working on now is different than what I worked on 5 years ago, and I'm hoping in 5 years ago it'll be different. I hope. Yeah.
No, it's a great point. I joke about net impact that we're placing these young people as Trojan horses in corporate America. And, my hope is 10, 20 years from now, they'll be the ones. I have a veranda in Jamaica I hope to have still be there. So hopefully they'll solve these issues to make it ready. So your point about flexibility and changing roles over time is very
well. And just on that, I have had the privilege of working in many different institutions, been on boards of ratepayer advocates, been on, in corporations and government, but I've been the same person throughout. And it's because my mentality is, where do I have impact and how do I grow? And so if I'm I'm having impact, I have perspective, but I've moved to different roles over time because I wanted to grow. I wanted to have different experiences. And I do think the experiences I've had have made me better at being within the company, especially given that I do work with government, than if I hadn't had those experiences.
Well, I know there are questions in the room. The bad news is she does have a Cinderella moment to get to, so Carla won't be here for all of this, but hopefully we can get one or two in.
Yeah,
Hillary,
sure.
I'm going to turn to you to direct how we process this. Sure.
Hi.
PG&E has for education, and over the years, offered two classes of battery technology, solar panels, wonderful side. I don't work for PG&E.
It's not a plug.
The other side of the coin is, these days, you can buy solar panels for, like on eBay, 30 cents a kilowatt hour, or kilowatt for solar panels, and there's a lot of incentive for people just to abandon PG&E and create their own with battery technology, and they can get crash cars, all electric cars that have a battery. It's 64 kilowatts, way bigger than a Tesla Powerwall, and run that at night, charge it in the daytime from the sun. So my question is, what is PG&E doing? Well, PG&E limits. Sorry. I guess that was it. Is this one? Should be on. Oh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Is this on now? There you go. Now? Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, with solar panels being 30 cents a kilowatt hour or so on, at least you can get new ones on eBay for that. There needs to be some incentive to come back to PG&E instead of just going independent of PG&E and going off grid. PG&E limits the amount of solar energy you can put back into the grid. And I'm wondering if there's some way to change that so that we're able to put more energy back in the grid. PG&E is going to need more energy for charging the EVs at night. And people who are charging have over an excessive solar panels and overly large battery systems. They have a lot of energy to put back on the grid. But if they're not connected to PG&E, because PG&E won't let them put all that extra energy on the grid. So is there something that you can do, or we can do to encourage PG&E to
Sure.
allow
So
us to put more.
incentivizing the customer to be using the system.
We're not a solar farm,
Yeah.
but we're much bigger than, we have excess energy.
Yeah, so a couple things. So first of all, I'll touch upon a few things. We're going to need all different technologies under the tent to meet the need. When we talk about where electric growth is going, it is, I mean, I think was it 70 gigawatts or something? Thank you, David. Right? 70 gigawatts will need additional in the 2040, 2050 timeframe, right? So there is tremendous amount of growth that we're going to need, and rooftop solar is a part of that, but it's not going to be enough. And so we're going to need to have localized generation. We're also going to need to have transmission. We're also going to need to have a diversity of resources. And you really, I think you highlighted batteries. When we now are bringing rooftop solar on the grid, we want to make sure that it actually is providing power at the times where it'll be most helpful. And so that is coupled with batteries. You know, you saw the duck curve. Right now, we're seeing solar come on the system, but it's not coming at times when it is being utilized. So I think it is really about a couple of things. It is about pairing that solar with batteries. It is also getting really specific about where we have local capacity constraints, because that's also where distributed energy can also be helpful as well. And I say at this point, we have we compensate solar power at a very high level, higher than the cost of other generation. And so I think that there are ample incentives.
Okay, one more, two? Okay, right there. One more. Hillary's cracking the whip. Go ahead. Yep.
So my friend here from London, so we've got one of the most sophisticated grids in the world in the UK. Two of the things that we've been seeing as investors and entrepreneurs is use of flexible grid connections as opposed to firm grid connections, like data centers and high-powered EV charging onto the grid. And secondly, using software to access distributed energy resources as opposed to physical infrastructure. Talk a little bit about how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, we're doing that as well, because we want to bring loads on when they're ready. So we don't want to have an EV charger wait for a few years while we're building out a substation, for example. Or we don't want to have a data center wait. And so we want to be able to meet demand faster. So the way to do that is, as we're waiting to build, as we're taking the process to permit, et cetera, to build out the system more, we can use software, we can use DERM systems. We got WeaveGrid is going to be on the next panel. We've got folks who do this work, and really there's so many great use cases. Like we were able to find, so we do engineering, right? Our engineers were telling people, okay, we can't connect you because there were a few hours out of the 24/7 that they would not be able to provide full power. Instead, we realized actually we could provide power 95% of the time. So what about that 5%? With that 5% of the time, you can work with that load and say, okay, can you throttle down and not use as much energy during these hours? And so we've been able to serve load much faster. There's also opportunities at the home level, right? So having things like smart panels that would allow for electric vehicle to come on to someone's home without having to upgrade those systems. So that really dynamic relationship and what software and AI can do to enable that, I do think is a game changer, and it's allowing us to meet needs faster. So we are sophisticated too, my friends.
Yeah, for California. Yes. I know there are more hands, and we will have other opportunities after the next session and then through networking. But please join me in thanking Carla for. And the scan's still, if the scan's not still up, we'll make sure it's there, because clearly PG&E has a great story to tell, and there's a lot more to discover. So thanks again, and Carla, thanks again for making time.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Like we are committed to this work, and we're committed to being in conversation with you, right? Just one thing I'll mention is we put out research statements. We have like 70 research problems we don't know how to answer. That's where we need your input. Like that's how we work together. So I really appreciate your questions and your input, and keep them coming.
Take it over. All right, panelists, we're on. Thanks. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to have a
hopefully invigorating discussion here. And my name is Dave Newberry. I'm one of the leaders of the Net Impact San Francisco Professional Chapter. And we are a community building organization, just as the national chapter is, for professionals in San Francisco. So if you like this event, come talk to me and we'll talk about doing more of it. Panelists, would you like to introduce yourself and also give your name, title, organization, and what your secret source of energy is? If you could share some icebreaking with.
Cool. Yeah, I can start. So my name is David Almeida. I'm Senior Manager for Clean Energy Transportation Strategy and Policy. So I oversee the implementation of what is called our EV True North strategy of reaching 3 million EVs and 550 megawatts of flexible load by 2030. My secret energy. So I'm an extrovert. I work with so many different people, and one of the things that that kind of helps energize me throughout the day is all of the cool people that I work with across the company. And I think Carla mentioned a little bit about this with utility. You get to work with so many different people that are doing so many different things that you learn constantly. And so one of the things that I valued about my experience at utility is that I am like constantly learning, and the challenges that we deal with when I first started are significantly different than the challenges that I'm dealing with right now.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Smriti Mishra. I'm at WeaveGrid. I'm our head of automotive and strategic partnerships. And yeah, I've been at WeaveGrid from the earliest days and have helped us scale from the early product to working with about 7 of the 10 largest utilities in the US, where we serve areas that cover 50 million households. We have a software that helps with EV managed charging and can do a whole bunch of different use cases that we'll talk about, and have been working with PG&E as well as others for several years. I am also an extrovert, which is probably what you'll find for folks who are willing to get on the stage. But yeah, guess since you've stolen my hang out with cool people answer, I also get a lot of energy from doing things like word puzzles. When my brain's starting to lag, I really get into that. I honestly start before I even get out of bed in the morning. It's like the first thing I do is like some of the New York Times puzzles and get moving. But yeah, so I enjoy puzzles and games to reinvigorate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Turnbull, and I am the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for an organization called the Alliance for Transportation Electrification. We are a trade association of about 60 members. Our members are utilities, automakers, software companies. PG&E is a member, WeaveGrid is a member, and we work at the state regulatory level to promote a strong role for utilities in the transition and acceleration of electric vehicles. Oh, and my secret source of energy, I am a really big transportation decarbonization nerd. And so in addition to being an EV person, I'm also a bike person. And I lead the weekly bike bus at my son's elementary school, where we all bike to school once a week together. I've got a giant speaker that I put on the back of my electric cargo bike, and we are a rolling party, and it is really, really fun.
That's awesome.
That's best answer.
That's why we closed with her.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, nobody asked me, but getting in front of a whiteboard gets me energized about any topic. I will spit out ideas for like hours and hours. I like it. Anyways, to set the context for the discussion, California has set ambitious climate goals for 2045. Aiming to cut air pollution by 71%, slash greenhouse gas by 85%, and drop gas consumption by 94%. So what do you see as the biggest challenge, whether it's technical, policy, behavioral, that's standing in the way, or what's the biggest opportunity? Dave, you can start.
Yeah, sure. So, I think for my perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is in the transition for electric vehicles. I think we're facing a really unique period right now. So I started in this industry in 2009, I graduated in probably one of the worst times to try and find a job. It was the economic crisis. You guys probably don't even know that, or you're too young for that. But it was real tough to find a job. But I ended up landing in this space and started with a nonprofit at the release of the first 2 EVs that ever were released, or not ever, but most recently, which is a Nissan Leaf and a Chevy Bolt. And what I've seen over the past several years is that we have done significantly well in adoption of mainly with early adopters. But in PG&E service territory, we are at a place where we are kind of hitting that mark with if you guys know the technology diffusion curve, I'm sure you guys probably do, your net impact, some of your business school, what have you, you're at this place where you're going to cross the chasm. So we are where we're and in many cases, we're past that. So Carla mentioned that Santa Clara County, 46% last year of new vehicle sales. In July of last year was 50%, which is crazy. Contra Costa's high 30s, Alameda's high 30s, but then we have places like Trinity where it's 2%, right? So, but we're at a place right now where we're we're getting significant adoption, but in order to move to that next level, we really have to change a lot of what we're doing. We got to make it really easy for customers to adopt. We have to really figure out how we can get them to enroll in a lot of these programs that we want to get to manage the growth of EVs. And I think that's both one of the biggest challenges we have, but also one of the most exciting things for us to work on within this space.
Right on. Every challenge is an opportunity, right? Okay, so sort of on that point, in the next 5 to 10 years, what's one innovation, policy, or partnership you believe will be a game changer in the transition from gasoline to electricity? Smriti, if you want to take that.
Yeah, so I think that, Dave, you're hitting on exactly the right point, right? And it's about how do you reach as many people as possible as we're moving out of the early adopters. And it's going to come down to keeping driver and customer experiences as simple as possible. Instead of, going on that journey of what can we teach people? What do they have to learn? What do they have to think about differently? How do you just keep things meet folks where they're at and really reduce that burden for learning and changing? And so one of the things WeaveGrid does, I said we have a software that's for utilities and doing managed charging. But the way that we create that product is through very deep partnerships with automotive companies, with charging companies, right? And so we include some of them. We've got both utilities and automotive companies within our investor group, including Toyota, Hyundai, and some other strategics. And that's been really exciting because we take from that and say, okay, how do drivers really are increasingly thinking about their cars in things like their automotive apps? And so how can we have the right tools embedded within those apps? How can you give people information at the moment that they're plugging in, at the moment that they arrive home, the times they're thinking about it and are making a decision about what to do with their charging based on what you know about that car? And so again, meeting people where they're at, creating simple, good experiences. And that's a lot of this collaboration has started. I said we're doing that at WeaveGrid. It's still in the early days. The market is evolving and growing. And so what I think is really going to be fascinating to watch in the next 5 years is what happens as we go big and these collaborations get so much deeper. It's why we're members of AT and we've been so excited by the conversations that you're creating and driving in the industry that I really think are going to be extremely transformative. And so, I think the collaborations and partnerships that'll matter, you're paving the way. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I put together a panel at the annual meeting that we did earlier this year for ATE members, and it was utilities and automakers. And what happens when you work at a small organization is you kind of name panels funny things, and then nobody ever comes along to stop you. So I called it Game Recognizes Game, right? And I think, these are two long-standing industries that are learning to work together for the first time, right? We're seeing automakers start to understand what utility business models and regulatory models look like, and we're starting to see utilities take a look at, well, wait a minute, what kind of technology are you putting in the car, and how can we work together to make that happen? And so that's very exciting. I think, we've been sort of talking, I think, without saying it out loud, largely about the sort of light duty market, but it's happening on the heavy duty side too. And I think that that's a really important collaboration. I think to answer your question, Dave, the thing that I'm kind of most excited about is some new innovative regulatory models around proactively building the grid to accommodate big charging load, especially in the medium and heavy duty space. That's not the way utility investments historically have worked, and that's not a model that many commissions around the country are very familiar with. And so we're working with our members, including a lot of the large, medium, and heavy duty manufacturers, to sort of promote that case for the utilities that are interested in making those investments, so that we can be proactively building the grid to the places that we know are going to electrify first. And when those customers come along to electrify, they can do that quickly. They can do that in a pretty cost-effective way, so that we can get that load on the grid, get that downward pressure on rates, and get the EV adoption that we know we need.
That sounds great. And, you know, we're in an era of some policy uncertainty. Have you seen any effect on that, or on the pace of adoption? Or it seems like we've got a lot of optimism here for how the future is going. What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think I hear about that like all the time. You know, is the market tanking? What's happening here? And we hear it from our executives, we hear it from others. They just want to know what's going on. Last year in our service territory, we didn't see that. We have seen some slower growth, but we're seeing significant growth. So you heard it from Carla. Last year was 28% of new vehicle sales were EVs. I think the year before that was 25%. The year before that, it was like 12%. So we saw like a pretty steep path, and now it's kind of leveling off, which is in line with what I was talking about. We're kind of at that moment where it's early adopters getting to that early majority. But the other thing I would say is on the medium and heavy duty side, that's largely like the light duty sides. We're still seeing really strong growth in that. And just put in perspective, that's a lot of EVs that are on the road every month that we're seeing that in our service territory. On the medium and heavy duty side, there's a lot of kind of concern about some of the policy changes. There is a policy called the Advanced Clean Fleets that is a bit uncertain right now. I think the CARB has decided they're going to pull back on the waiver that they're going to submit to the federal government, just because, for lots of different reasons. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but and there's some concern about are we going to see some real significant cooling on the medium and heavy duty side? And we have a program right now that is focusing on developing infrastructure for medium and heavy duty customers. And we've seen I think there's about a dozen customers that dropped out, but we've also hit our contract goal 5 months ahead of schedule. So primarily because we have a lot of customers that are already committed to it, doing this for a lot of but we're still seeing strong growth.
Yeah, I would say that policy uncertainty, particularly at the federal level, is very hard on business, right? Business needs a stable regulatory and policy environment in order to thrive. These are investments that are made on a very long scale, right? I've heard automakers talking about their light duty vehicles. They're like, we're designing for the next federal administration. We're not designing for the next 4 years. We're designing for year 5 to 7. And the same is certainly true in terms of medium and heavy duty and the adoption plans that those fleets have. So I think that while there's a lot that's coming out of the federal government right now about EVs that is disheartening. I think the pullback in funding is wrong. I think that the dissolution of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation is wrong. I think it's important for the federal government to be leading in some of those areas. And I think there will be impacts to the market, but I think that we're on a track and we're continuing forward. And I keep saying we're not going in reverse. So onward.
Yeah, and I'll echo all of that. We're really seeing, states continue on the trajectory that they have already been on and plowing ahead. So WeaveGrid has several programs that have gone from the several thousand car pilot into permanent tariff programs. It's interesting to hear you talk about automotive design cycles, because as much as we felt like it's hard to get into through a tariff cycle, it is just as much for us to be a part of automotive design cycles and that depth of partnerships. And that is like hard work that's already just the momentum is there and is continuing. And so yeah, we continue to just see a lot of, tailwinds for the market. That doesn't mean the anxiety in businesses isn't real and doesn't have an impact, and it creates more planning conversations. But otherwise, like, the market fundamentals are still driving a lot of growth, and so that's still really exciting for us.
I want to add one more thing, because I think Elizabeth brought up a really good point. I mean, I think manufacturers build for the world too. And the world is moving towards EVs. So that's an important aspect to think about, is just both the production cycle that they have, which is about 5 to 7 years, and then also what the rest of the world is doing. And they are in large scale by adopting EVs. So I think that you need to look at kind of a little bit more longer term when you're thinking about kind of what's going to happen to the market.
Great. So on that topic of, building for all, how do you think about making sure that everyone has access to clean forms of transportation, that it is accessible?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we should talk about, I'm glad Carla gave her TED Talk. It's pretty awesome. She's such a great speaker. She's so funny. But she hit on affordability. And I just want to spend a bit of time just talking a bit about like why EVs are important to affordability. So we have some of the highest rates in the country. A little bit about me, I started at PG&E in 2012. I left in 2020. I worked at some startups, and I came back. When I left, we did not have the highest rates in the country. When I came back, we had the highest rates in the country. We have a capacity constrained grid. We have all these challenges, but it's and we'll talk about it later in the questions of like why I work here. It's primarily because it's so challenging. There's so many exciting things we can do with that. But one of the things that we have been committed to, and I've been committed to since I started in this business, is EVs have this potential to provide downward rate pressure. And I don't know if you've heard that terminology. Anyone hear that terminology, like downward rate pressure? There's a few of you. It's kind of wonky. So, and it's what Carla was mentioning is like, essentially, if we can use electricity when we have extra capacity, that's more kilowatt hours on the system, spreads over the system, or fixed costs, it reduces costs for all customers. EVs have that potential, right? Because you can theoretically move charging throughout the day. Not all the time. Sometimes you got to drive and sometimes you got to plug in to do that. But cars are idle a lot of the day. And so if you can move and spread that charging around, you can fill up the belly of the duck from a generation standpoint, help reduce costs for all customers. And then what we're working on with WeaveGrid is more on that local distribution level, which is another kind of a level to do this. If we can reduce demand on a local system, we can push out the need to upgrade that system longer. And that allows us to kind of defer investments for the grid. And that gives us the ability to provide downward rate pressure, like lower costs for all customers. Beyond that, we have a lot of stuff that we're doing to help increase access to EVs for all customers. Did you guys know that we have a used EV rebate program? Has anyone adopted it? Sweet. So did I, actually, not too long ago. So we have programs like that we're leveraging from a pretty unique funding mechanism that is unique to California, has been adopted to other parts of the country, called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, where we are taking the revenue from polluters, primarily oil companies, distributors, and refiners, taking that, we get climate credits associated with that. These refiners will buy these credits. We take the revenue from those credits and we invest it back into EV adoption through the use of rebates, through programs, through other sorts of things within that. And that's helping us to help to allow and reduce the cost for all customers to get access to this. And we have a whole suite of programs. In fact, we are launching a program this year that is providing a debit card specifically for low-income customers who do not have access to charging at their house, to allow them to use the public charging network to reduce the cost for them. Because we recognize that there are barriers beyond just getting an EV to also charge an EV. So we're really looking at kind of all these different types of solutions that we can use in order to increase access to that. And that helps because it helps from a climate perspective, but it also puts more downward pressure on rates. If we can get more people to use EVs, we are able to, spread that load around, with the help of organizations like WeaveGrid and others that can help us to run our system more efficiently.
Yeah, and I want to be really clear. Like, so we do that managed charging for something super weird, like your distribution asset. I don't know how many people in this room have ever thought about their distribution assets, right? Like that's the poles and wires, the transformer on the end of your block. By and large, most energy like markets and ways that people are shifting charging are for what's called the bulk system. Don't worry about all this drama. We definitely don't want the average driver worrying about this drama. And really what that means is, like, I talked earlier about how important simplicity is for the market, right? And you think about how do you make it accessible, right? And like having things like the used car credit is one important piece of it. But again, that need for a simple experience becomes that much more important while the grid's complex needs are increasing, right? So what WeaveGrid does is we've actually had customers have a consistent experience, whether they're in something that is really just for managing something like a time of use rate and just like when in the day they're charging, all the way through being in one of our most complex programs. And so that's live with thousands of PG&E customers today and in different parts of the country, where the customers always have a set it and forget it experience. We see that, 98, 99% of folks stay in the programs. The only reason they leave the programs is because they literally move the state or sell their car. And so we're seeing that success in year over year. We started working with PG&E, I want to say in 2022, 2021, something like that. So it's, yeah.
22.
22. And PG&E's really thought holistically about that customer experience. And so, we've talked about what is the grid side of it and the grid needs. Another one of the very first use cases that we made sure was in place was, hey, what gives folks anxiety is sometimes that grid outage, right? And what does it mean to be resilient to that? And so PG&E was like, listen, we want you to buy an EV with confidence. So we're going to make sure your cars are charged ahead of those. And so WeaveGrid was the tool to have that in place and have that resilience. And so again, whoever you are, you should be able to get an EV with confidence. It'll always be there for you when you need it.
Yeah, we work with utilities across the country, and I don't know a single utility that's doing EV programs that doesn't have some kind of program angle for equity, low-income customers, pollution overburdened areas, right? I think we all see the ties to how, getting somebody especially somebody who drives high miles and has a high share of their wallet that's going towards gasoline, getting that person into an EV is better for the environment and better for their wallet and can help save them money. And so, all of these programs, I think, are designed around making sure that we can get the folks who are most prone to EVs, who tend to not be low income at this point, but also have support for lower income customers who can get into an EV.
Great, and that's great to hear, that it is accessible. So switching gears a little bit to warm up our networking a little, what advice would you give to somebody, from the career perspective, what advice would you give someone entering this field who wants to make a tangible impact on clean energy and decarbonization? Maybe Elizabeth, you want to start?
Okay, I'm so glad you called on me first because I'm worried that they're going to steal my answer. My answer is go work for a utility. So before I started at ATE, I had over a decade of experience working at electric utilities, including PG&E, where David hired me, and then also at Portland General Electric up in Oregon. I think frequently utilities can be seen as an obstacle to the clean energy transition. And if that is a secret thought that you hold in the back of your mind, I want to disabuse you of that notion tonight. This doesn't happen without utilities. And if you want to go work for a startup, understanding how the grid is regulated and the business model of the utility is what's going to give you the tools to understand what your business model needs to be.
We hire lots of people from utilities, including me. I came from National Grid.
So my advice is, if you want to understand how this transition really happens, you need to understand the grid and go work for a utility. That's the best place to learn.
I wasn't going to say that, but I love that answer. I will at least add to that and say the reason I joined a utility was I started in a different high growth energy business. And I really believed in the mission of changing how the world uses energy and wanting to know how I can make an impact at scale. And I was like, fundamentally, I'm not going to do that without understanding how utilities make decisions, right? What does it mean in practice to deliver safe, clean, reliable, affordable power? That's going to be fundamental to how we change how the world uses energy. It's the mission that, utilities were the first mission-driven company. And that's why I joined National Grid. I'm proud of utility work. We've brought on cool people like Luna, also from PG&E. So yeah, if you want to, drive innovation, utilities are a good place for that. I want to bring back to some of Carla's advice where she was saying, hey, think about what you're already good at. The extra color that I put on that when I talk to folks sometime is see if you can find the thing you enjoy and are good at and other people don't like. Right? That's a fun secret sauce. Like when I told you earlier that I get, energy from solving puzzles. I really like contracting. I find contracting to be a very interesting puzzle. I love working with a good general counsel. It has that personal dynamic that builds into it. And then there's a very technical piece of that puzzle, right? A lot of people, including a lot of lawyers, really don't like contracting. And so that's a great place, right? You're really gonna thrive in your career when you find those spots that you enjoy and make you a little different.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I think utilities are great. I worked there for a long time. I'm gonna take it a little bit different direction. To back when I was in maybe some of your shoes. I don't know how many of you are in grad school right now or in college and looking to get a job. Okay, all right. So I want to go to your space for a minute. So I remember. So I went to school. My undergrad was in molecular biology and political science. 2 degrees, super interesting, but you can't get a job. And so then I traveled around the world because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I worked in restaurants. I just saved up money to do that. And then I decided I wanted to go back to grad school. And I had 4 years of travel experience, but not a lot of work experience. And I had this very rarefied 2 degrees that I knew a lot about, a protein that shuttled iron from your blood into your intestinal lumen into your bloodstream. Not super helpful, right? So then I went into grad school and thought started getting really excited and interesting about energy. But I was like, I don't even know how to do anything in Outlook. I don't know how to do I don't even know. I know the stuff about energy, but I don't really know how to get into it. And like I said before, I graduated in in the Great Recession. The peak of the Great Recession. And so I was like, shit, what am I gonna do? I don't have a job, I don't have any money, I have all this mounting student debt. So what and I remember one story, I was looking around for work, and I went to all these restaurants, and they're like, where's your resume? And I was like, what? You need a resume for a restaurant? I've never had that before. And I went to one restaurant, and they're like, all right, well, you can shuck oysters. And I was like, oh my God, I have a graduate degree. I went back to my wife, and I was like, I have a graduate degree, and they're gonna want me to just shuck oysters. What's going on with my life? And so anyways, kind of personal crisis over. I took a minute and I was like, what do I need to do to learn learn about this space and get out there? And so I like talking with people. I like working with people. I like solving problems. And so I figured, you know what? I am going to find a place for me to intern. I'm going to find an organization that I like, and I'm going to just try and just learn from that process. And so I went in with that mindset, and I interned at one location, ended up moving up to LA, and kind of through that internship, I also got some feedback that was just go to conferences, volunteer at conferences, volunteer at these events so you can learn about things. They always want people to help out with that. So I did that. And through that process, I met somebody that was like, hey, would you like to meet someone that works, the deputy mayor for energy and environment in Los Angeles? And I was like, great. So I met with him, and he was like, hey, I can't pay you, but I have a job for you if you want to do a fellowship with me. We'll call it a fellowship. It'll be all fancy and you can do some work in here, and then we can use that to boost up your resume. And I did it. And it was probably one of the best things I did for my career, because it allowed me to get access to a lot of other people, learn more about things. And then I had, I was starting to just a lot of networking within that. I was able to kind of get my foot into the door. So the point of this story is, so I'm kind of rambling a little bit. What if you can't get into a space and you feel like you don't have those skill sets, that's okay. Just try and get out there and try and learn as you're, and you have lots of different avenues to do that. And then where you land is where you land. And so I didn't end up in the utility first. I started at a nonprofit. Actually, at that place that I interned the first time, they ended up getting a job, having a job opening. It was to launch this California's first incentive program for EVs. I had a connection with people that work there. They knew me. And so that allowed, and then I had spent some time with the mayor's office in Los Angeles, and it allowed me to kind of parlay that into a job. And I would not have been able to do that unless I got out of my comfort zone, went out, did this internship, and I kind of cashed my ego too. Because I was like, well, I'm not gonna do that. I don't have any money. And I'm not gonna work for you for free. And I'm not advocating to work for free at all. I'm just saying, but what I ended up doing in that respect was I hustled. I ended up getting some temp work, but I allowed myself to space to make sure that I was building up some of that skill set with some of these organizations, and it parlayed into that job. Now, that was a different situation. That was the economic crisis. That was the Great Recession. You're not in that space right now. You can get a job and get paid to do that. But like, not yet. Not yet. So, but you can get an opportunity to do that. So I think like use the opportunity to network, talk to like us, we're in the break or in the reception, and also think about how you can get out there and just kind of learn about through these different events.
Okay, sure. If I can sum up what all of these experts said is basically join a professional organization in your city, come to networking events, help host networking events. You can find yourself up on stage with them, and it's a great opportunity. So just some thoughts. So now we've got a few more minutes left here. I'd like to open it up for audience question and answer. Woman in the back with their arm up.
Hydrogen is only like a good solution for some buses. It probably will be for long haul trucks. So are you evaluating maybe doing different tariffs or different programs for on-site hydrogen production for those type of fleets where it's better in the ecosystem while electricity works for other types of vehicles?
Yeah, and we've looked at hydrogen for years, so it's not like that's a new thing. And I've also heard hydrogen is right around the corner, for many, many years. In fact, I think there was a state had a goal of hitting a certain number of stations by 2015, and they pushed that and pushed that and pushed that. So we definitely are, and I think it is a solution for on the transit sector for a lot of transit agencies. But they're comparing that also to a lot of battery electric buses that are just as competitive within that. What we're seeing, I think, on the hydrogen side is that, at least anecdotally, that some of the transit agencies are moving towards hydrogen due to like some delays in our capacity in getting connection. And I think that's kind of an important thing to look at of, well, what are we doing to help with that? Because, the economics for on EV is pretty rock solid. And so there's somebody in the audience named Alex, if Alex, you want to raise your hand for a second. So that concept that Carla was talking about, that flexible service connection, Alex's team runs that program. And so I think yes, hydrogen is a solution, but we're also looking at, how do we reduce delays for customers so they can connect faster. Yeah.
Okay, next question. You in the blue?
Hi there. So I live in Santa Clara County, and I have 2 plug-in vehicles with 90 kilowatt hours of batteries sitting in my garage that could be used for V2G flexible benefits to the grid. And I know there's been a lot of issues around standards and other things, but I believe we have an ISO standard for V2G. And Australia, I think now has they've identified a standard for their grid. I think California is bigger than Australia in terms of GDP. So is there a roadmap for adopting V2G, at least in California?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I think I'd say that we have some work to do in order to make it a lot simpler across the whole industry, from both OEMs, charging manufacturers, and utilities. But we're looking at and working on solutions to make that a lot cheaper and easier. So we've had a couple smaller scale, we call them pre-pilots with Ford, where we deployed and tested out a V2G system with a Ford F1 Lightning or a Ford F-150 Lightning to see what we're looking at. And one of the things we learned from that process is that the current setup right now is pretty costly for customers. You have to have, a inverter that's outside of the vehicle that adds space to the house. You have to figure out like the distance from that can't be so close to the gas meter, and then you have like all this equipment. Suddenly you have like a big installation costs skyrocket. So one of the things that the utilities, PG&E is doing, as well as the other utilities, are looking at working with automobile manufacturers to do something called AC V2G, where that inverter is built inside the car, and so that that cuts down a lot of the costs associated with that. There's standards that need to be kind of finalized within that. In fact, last week we were with the Public Utilities Commission talking about how we can scale up VGI, and we had folks from the standards body who are like talking about kind of how they're formalizing some of those standards. So I think, like not from a perspective of kind of roadmap, but we're really like trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then how do we get to a place where we can reduce costs so we can scale that up? And we think AC V2G is a really good option to do that. But that also means that you need to have OEMs, vehicle manufacturers, on board with that, charging companies, all those things to make that happen.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It goes back to a theme we had earlier. This is one of the kind of, long list of reasons that those partnerships are going to be really important. WeaveGrid's done some V2G demonstrations in Michigan with the Kia E9 and the Wallbox. And so there are more affordable cars and other things coming out there, but like how that all fits together, how do you like make these both available and accessible to customers that want it, and also have the right types of grid interconnection plans that are going to make this work at scale. It makes like these partnership conversations again at the center of how we're going to grow in the next few years.
Yeah, I'll just add that the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which is the trade association for automakers that have dealerships in the U.S., came out with a paper last summer, I believe, looking at vehicle grid integration and what do the automakers think the utilities need to be doing in order to make that happen. And that has prompted a conversation between automakers and utilities on, okay, well, and what do we think you need to do? And sort of how do we get there together? I think the best application now is in school buses. That's where we're seeing it, as with the Oakland School District, because you can sort of you can scale it and reduce those on-site costs. But I do think that long-term, vehicle to grid is coming for light duty vehicles as well. I mean, it's here, but it's going to come at scale.
Okay, over there. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for speaking about the importance of electrifying. Absolutely crucial. A lot of the conversation today has been really focused on EVs, though, when the most efficient, affordable, equitable way to move people is electric mass transit. It's how a lot of us got here and are going to leave. Can any of you speak to your organizations working on that, improving it, access, affordability? Does that come on your radar? We saw what happened with Caltrain. It electrified, and suddenly everyone's taking it more, and now we don't need to expand 101.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say, when we talk about transportation electrification, it's transportation, right? And it's of people and goods, right? So this is not a game that's all about personal vehicles. And if you go back to my bike bus thing, we've got more EVs on the road causing more congestion, causing the ICE cars that are still on the road to sit there longer and idle is not the right solution either, right? So I think it's a multi-pronged solution, but yes, school buses are in the mix, electric transit buses are in the mix. ATE doesn't do as much of the off-road stuff, but there's certainly a lot going on in those areas. And I think everybody who, the solution is not every person in their own electric vehicle.
Yeah, and I would just add, so CARB, the state's air regulator, has something called the Innovative Clean Transit Rule to help or to encourage transit agencies to electrify across the state. And so, one, we want to electrify everything. You heard Carla, we want to electrify homes, buses, trucks, everything. And one of the things that we've been doing, that my team personally has been doing over the past year, has been really working with those transit agencies to understand what are their electrification plans so that we can incorporate those plans into our grid planning efforts. And that's really, really important. It's like kind of wonky and like, why is that so sexy? It's not that kind of, but it is really important because if we can understand and we can get, really good data on when they're going to electrify, that allows us to put that into our distribution plans as well as our general rate cases in order to get funding to build that infrastructure. If we do not know where that is, what we will run into is some of the delays that we get for the capacity because we're not prepared for that load. And suddenly, we have someone in Kings County coming to us saying, hey, we need 2 megawatts, or not even 2 megawatts, we need 20 megawatts at this load, where in a very rural area. That's going to trigger significant upgrades. It's going to trigger line work. It's going to trigger substation work that we're not anticipating. So definitely working on that, and not just the transit agencies though. We're working also with like our fleet applications and the light duty sector. Light duty sector gets a lot of press and like a lot of cover because it's sexy and there's a lot of them there, but we're working across the whole spectrum.
Sweet again. Okay, thank you. I'm going to stick on to the train question and kind of related to like outside of the transit agencies, like how are we looking strategically at using like rail corridors? And this is an idea from Solutionary Rail, if folks are familiar with that, but using the rail corridors and the opportunity to electrify rail across the country as a solution, like a co-benefit solution to move interconnection and using like that right of way for transmission lines?
That's a good question.
So I don't know that any of us have expertise in that. I'm going to draw on when I used to work on National Grid's transmission strategy team. It's a really interesting area when you're just thinking about there's a lot of regulatory barriers for what happens when you cross state lines, grid operator lines, and things like that. And I don't remember when. If someone wants to, check your, AI on your phone, FERC Order 1000 way back in the day came out to make transmission more competitive and really look at how to bring down different costs. And one of the dynamics that comes up with that is the default for transmission is that the local utility will make it in part because they have the right of ways already, right? And so I think that thinking more creatively about right of ways across different areas is a way that the transmission sector has been evolving significantly because we're like, hey, as we want to, one of the goals of this Order 1000 that was meant to drastically change how transmission is bought and is built. Being more competitive was one of the goals. Another one of the goals was to bring down cost, and another was to increase renewables utilization. And these things ultimately all work together hand in hand. So yeah, I love the creative thinking, and that's definitely been an active conversation in the transmission sector for like the last 10 years or so.
We've got a question from our online audience. This is going to be our last question, and then we're going to move to the networking. But this one is fun because it's kind of interactive. Close your eyes. Open them. It's now 2050. you see the perfect grid. What does the perfect grid look like in your mind? You want to go?
I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to tell you why this question is hard to answer. Okay. And then you can answer. I'm going to buy you time. That's what I'm going to do. Put on you, or you can jump in, Elizabeth. So someone, gave this analogy to me a while ago, and it was if you wanted to design the perfect grid and you started with a blank piece of paper. Sorry, I'm going to start this over for the actual metaphor. If you wanted to design something that moves quickly and efficiently through water, and you started with a blank sheet of paper, you'd end with a submarine. If you started with a mouse, you'd end with a platypus. It would get the job done, but it wouldn't be a submarine. There are parts of the world where there's so much electrification now happening in rural parts of the country that they're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and they are making that efficient grid to design to multiple goals that we now have with technology that we now have. In the US, we started on Thomas Edison's block. We started in one random city block over there, and then they all tried to connect up together, and it kind of didn't work. So the American grid is a platypus that we are trying to turn into a submarine.
That's great. That's awesome.
That's excellent.
Mic drop. So I totally agree. I mean, that with that metaphor, because I don't know if you guys know our grid. PG&E historically, I love those images that Carla had. Those are funny. But we're multiple companies that absorbed each other, and so we have really different grids within our service territory by nature of the fact that we were this hodgepodge of utilities that came together. But I will answer the question of some of the things that I think. What I would love to see the grid become more is much more dynamic. And I think that we can get there. And I've been really excited at some of the advances that have happened in the short period of time from when I was at PG&E and then when I came back. And some of those things that I'm talking about is really the implementation of something called the Distributed Energy Resource Management System, or DERMS. So there is a guy that works at PG&E, his name is Alex Portilla. He's been talking about DERMS since I've known him for many, many years. And I was like, I don't really know what DERMS is. And I was like, I'm gonna work on EVs and whatever. And I was thinking more about system-wide and capacity at the generation side and everything. So, but what I have seen when I came back, and I worked really closely with him on kind of the launch and implementation of this flexible service connection program, is that we're starting to see that in action, where you have interaction with distributed energy resources at that local distribution level. And that's where I think is going to be really exciting. And what I want to see is that you have a different relationship with your utility, and we are working with you to dynamically work to adapt the grid to your needs and our needs. And that's really going to be important for us as we get to this level of electrification that we need to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best grid is going to be safe, reliable, affordable, and clean. And out of those words, the hardest one, as Carla said, is the is doing all of it. And that's going to require the grid being flexible, and it's going to require the grid being more equitable, and it's going to require all of the electrification that we've been talking about. So I think it's we got to keep all the balls in the air. I think it's an enormous challenge. I think it's an enormous opportunity as I think about the careers that you all have and are going to have, and the careers that we get to continue to have. It's a real bonus to be able to work on such exciting challenges that have so much impact.
Great. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for the answers. And that wraps up our time for this evening. So Smriti, Elizabeth, David, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with everyone. And so let's give a big round of applause for the panel.
Thank you, Dave. Oh.
Yeah. Hey, and I just want to give an extra thanks to Dave. All of you may not know, but he stepped up very recently to really make sure that this panel would go well. And so you've been great to work with, and thank you.
So I also want to give a big thank you to our host, the venue host, Industrious, for this fantastic space. It's beautiful here. And finally, to great thanks to PG&E for putting this event on and sponsoring it so we could all be here. There would be a technical difficulties, so there may be some QR codes out there to take a short survey about your experience. Maybe there's one online, I'm not really sure. We do have one if you're interested in learning more about Net Impact San Francisco. We've got a placard out there with a QR code for our Linktree, or you can just come talk to me at the networking event, which is going to happen out on the terrace until 6:45. We've got a fairly hard stop, so talk fast. If you've ever seen the Will and Grace episode from Thanksgiving with the timer, like think that way, like just cut it off and move, and you get some great conversations in. But anyways, it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you out on the terrace.
No one talks fast like David Almeida.
I know. My name's Michael.